Hi, I'm Deb Crow, and I want to welcome you to Season 3 of Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. This is a podcast where we connect, learn, and laugh together with authentic and courageous leaders from all over the globe. You will learn from leaders you haven't even met yet. You will gain new tools to add to your leadership toolkit. Leadership belongs to all of us. It's not measured by stature or title. So please pull up a chair and listen in. This is the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. Okay, this is going to be a full disclosure moment for me. When I found my guest today, I literally perseverated. I love that word. On how I was going to contact him, what I was going to say. I had butterflies in my stomach. It was almost to the point where I wanted to really throw up. And then I decided to coach myself. And it was like, Steve gets up in the morning and brushes his teeth and has coffee just like you. Just send him an email, because the worst thing he's going to say is no. Well, I emailed him and he said, I'd love to be on your show. And here we are. I am so thrilled to have Steve Cadigan today. I'm not going to read his bio because I want you to enjoy the richness and brilliance of his career, his new business. We're going to talk about his new book. If you have any kind of thoughts about what the future of work is going to look like, is looking like, this is the show that's going to intrigue you. Steve is a talent strategist. He is a company culture expert. He is definitely heart-centered. I've listened to his podcast and I'm excited to read his book. So Steve, I am just so delighted to welcome you to the show.
I'm so happy to be here and I'm looking forward to this.
Well, I have some leadership questions for you. I'm getting goosebumps here already, and I'm going to dig in because I want our listeners to really embrace your brilliance and what you're doing. My first question around leadership is, you have said that passion can be overrated and that it can be a smoke screen preventing people, leaders from seeing what is real. Can you unpack that a little bit for us, and where does that stem from?
I had an opportunity many years ago to work in the video game industry. And after my first day on the job, my boss picked me up from orientation and she said something to me, which I think really captures this well. She said, you know, in this industry, in this business, in our company, we have to be really careful because sometimes drama governs decision, not data. And that as humans, I think sometimes we are a little easily distracted by sizzle and pop. And I think sometimes we misconstrue passion in ways that we halo that, wow, if that person is that excited or that animated, there must be some real substance behind it. And sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not true. And I've had a few mishires in my career where I got seduced by the sizzle and interpreted that as passionate. And it was just exuberance and excitement, but the depth of, you know, the quality wasn't as much there as I wanted it to be. So it was just a learning. And interestingly enough, my last regular job when I was the first chief HR officer at LinkedIn, that was a question the CEO asked me. He says, what are the most important attributes you look for when you're hiring someone? Okay. And I've been recruiting at that point, probably 25, 30 years in my life. And this, to me, that's one of my favorite professions in the world, is trying to, you know, interview and assess people and map them to what opportunities are going to best suit them. And I think for leaders, this is, I think, one of the most important muscles that we need to be really, really good at. So I listed off in this interview with the CEO, which is a really important interview for me to get right, what I thought. And he says, you didn't mention passion as one of the key things. And I said, well, it's important to me, but honestly, I've been fooled a few too many times. So I'm reluctant to lay that out as a necessary indicator for me.
Well, I'll add a part B to this question because I was going to get into the LinkedIn position and what you did there, because it was quite a feat. I mean, you went from 400 to 4,000 employees in 3.5 years. That's like recruiting on turbo mode. And from 2 to 16 countries.
Mm-hmm.
So I think about all the logistics just in that alone. And taking what you just said about the fundamental qualities that you look for. But what I want you to talk about is all the things that were hard that leaders don't always talk about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the things that you would have as a sounding board to a coach or to the CEO. How did you undertake that massive recruiting for LinkedIn?
Honestly, in retrospect, I don't know how we did that. It was incredibly messy. It was really hard. Imagine the pressure, Deb, because we are a recruiting centered product company. And if we don't deliver recruiting in our own organization really well, that's not going to go well for us in the market space. So it was like I was leading an effort where failure was not an option. So some of the problems that we had and some of the real frustrations that are still fresh in my rear view window, we never ever forecast the magnitude of the growth that we were going to go after, which meant every year we probably, and I'm probably under calling what the magnitude here, but we probably hired 200 to 300% more than we thought we would at the beginning of the year. No one manning the controls of big decisions in our company wanted a big company. None of us did. We were all big company refugees. So we're like, let's just get the bare minimum of what we need. Let's keep scrappy. We were not growing exponentially like our neighbors, Facebook and Google and Apple were. We were just slow and steady. We didn't have the sex appeal of a product that a Twitter had or the Facebook had at the time. So we didn't think that we were going to be as successful as we ultimately were. And then opportunities would present themselves midway through the year. And so when you're hiring at that pace and you're not planning to hire at that pace, you're always behind. You're always frustrated. Every hiring manager is overburdened and every recruiter is overburdened. And it's a very, very tense, stressful, unhealthy environment. And unfortunately, we never, and I never, and I put this on me as well as the other, my leaders, we never got in front of that to the point where we felt really satisfied with that effort. It was a grind the whole way. So that was sort of, issue number one that I think, in retrospect, on the outside, it's so flashy and so great. The second part that's really, really hard is when you go to say you went from 4,000 is impressive in the time frame that we did in a marketplace where the war for technical talent was never as great. And it's very, competitive today, but it was really hot back then to the point where regularly we would see if we made an offer to a candidate at a top tier company that they would receive a $500,000 retention bonus, $1 million retention bonus for them not to go. So those are the odds that we were fighting against. And for us to enter new countries, the complexity is just logarithmic compared to just in one headquarters, you're just adding people. No, you're going in a new country. They don't know who you are. You don't know the laws. You don't know the rules. You don't know the privacy regulations. And one of the things that was a big hurdle for us and was frustrating for me personally was that I was the only executive who lived and worked in 2 other countries. I've been in Singapore for 2 years and Canada for 4, and nobody on my peers had ever worked and lived in another country to know what it's like to be an expat, to know what it's like to be sort of not a welcome country, to know all the taxes and all the burdens that you have to go through to open a new bank account and all these other things and have your kids go to different schools. I'd experienced that. So moving people around and recognizing what it's like to be in a distant location wasn't something that there was a great appreciation for. And so I felt like I was yelling in the woods and no one was listening to me for a while until we had problems come up. So that was another piece of that. I think the other one was, and this was a fun one, which forced us to be creative, is nobody on our leadership team had ever grown a company from nothing to something. And we didn't have a map. We were going into new world with maps that we used in old world, and we're all big company refugees, which meant we'd been really good individually at going into big companies and tuning and tweaking and adjusting, but we never built something from nothing. And at first that was really hard for us. And I think probably a couple of years in, and I was the first person that the CEO he was the second or third CEO of the company, Jeff Weiner. I was the first person that he'd hired, and then he started to round out his team. And once we all kind of got settled and we recognized that, hey, this is actually pretty awesome that we don't have a map. Let's do it this way. Let's build it in our own image. And it took us a long time, honestly, Deb, longer than you would think, to sort of have the courage to say, we're deserving of this moment. We're worthy of this moment. We were always, well, maybe we're not, going to be successful. And that confidence took a while to take root. And at the time, I wasn't even appreciating the moment, Deb. Like, you're in it. My favorite quote to my boss when I'd go into his office for my one-on-one was, "Hey, Jeff, do you hear that noise?" And he said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Those are all the balls I'm dropping because I cannot do everything that we need done." He goes, "Well, you're just going to have to prioritize." I said, "I'm doing my best." But I'm a perfectionist. When you're at that level, everyone around you is a perfectionist, and it's not comforting. It's unsatisfying to know, you're not able to do all that. I'm sure you hear your clients tell you that all the time. But when that's happening at scale, and we're building a new industry that no one's ever built before, it was incredibly energizing and incredibly terrifying, at the same time.
I was going to say to you at the end of your answer was the amount of courage it must have taken you. So I'm smiling ear to ear in delight, because it's not all about intelligence. It's allowing your confidence to become parallel to being courageous. And it reminds me, I had Chip Conley on the show. I think we opened season 2 with him. And he said, "I remember when the Brainchilds called me from Airbnb, and he said, I'm old enough to be their dad. And they said, yeah, we have the idea, but we don't know how to build the company." And Chip said, "What I didn't realize was they needed my wisdom and my experience. And what I gained from them was getting back the imagination that I lost in the process of building my boutique hotels for 25 years.
Beautiful.
Like, it was just such a synergetic alignment between the millennial generation and the baby boomers. And he just said, and then I joked with him and I said, "How many Airbnbs have you stayed at?" And he's like, 150. Because when they first asked him to come, he said, "That's the most ridiculous idea I've ever heard of. Like, who would want to stay in someone else's home?" So he's a fun guy. And he says, "I am now eating humble pie."
Yeah.
And I love the way you unpacked that, because leaders from the executive level all the way up to the CEO, they have this, I call it this big obligation cloak that they have on, and they're trying to stay self-directed, but they get succumbed into perfection because everybody sees them in that light because of the stature that they've attached to their worth and worthiness. It's pressure, but you did it. It's like when you look back and go, I don't really know how I did that, but I did it. And it's a phenomenal thing. But I also love that you had the experience of moving your family to another country and talking about all the personal things that you had to go through. And it's hard to move across country, let alone to another country on the other side of the world, and all the things that come with that. And nobody ever talks about that. And I think that, again, brings that heart-centeredness to show, yeah, this was a lot of work. It wasn't the funnest thing to do, right down to what you said, opening up a bank account. So that knowledge that you were able to bring to LinkedIn, it's like you could sit in the observer's chair when you were trying to recruit people, knowing, hey, I know how this is going to go for you. I've gone through this. That relatability, I think, is what people want. And one of the things that I love the most about you when I've watched you speak and I've read reviews about your book, which we're going to talk about, is you bring such a common sense approach. And I often hear that from comments back from the show, that I lead a very common sense conversation. But common sense isn't common practice. So that's something I hope you and I are going to keep rippling out in the world. So let's talk about your book. But before I do, I have to ask you my second question, because it has permanent residency on the show and it's super fun and laughter is allowed. What imperfections does Steve bring to his heart-centered leadership?
Oh, how much time do we have? Gosh, I would say real struggle saying no. Real struggle, when things don't go right. It's really hard for me. I've been told this by many of the folks that I work for. We're dealing in the people business. It is gray. This is not a black and white universe. It is all gray. I remember going golfing at a charity event one time with a CFO whose entire half his workforce had gone on strike. And I go, how's it going over there? He goes, I love my job, except for the people. And I didn't know him well enough to know he was being very sarcastic, and he really did care, but it was really just an open admission of how challenging that can be. And I would say those are big ones for me. In the service business, like human resources, which has been my career path, there is no end to the service that you could offer. You have to draw the line yourself. And that is a big challenge that I've had my whole career is saying no. It's an issue in my family. It's an issue with my mom. I'll do that. I'll take care of it. Well, you said I didn't get to, sorry, and so it creates a hole for you. It was easier when we didn't have internet and email. And now you have more venues to get things, but I would probably say that's where it starts.
It's a common one. And like you said, when you get to a certain level, you kind of adapt that perfectionist, and sometimes it gets taken to an unhealthy level. But I think we all have cycles and seasons where we all experience that. And I also love that you said we are in the people business. I don't think it's sector dependent. And I think being home for a couple of years allowed us to virtually do business everywhere and touch everyone virtually. And the sector doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, it is great. We're all in the people business, regardless of our stature, our title, our roles and responsibilities, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's the part of the pandemic that I feel has really presented us with a great learning, which is this is about life. It's not about work. That's what we're trying to solve for, is great lives. And I see so many organizations that are trying to, get back to the office, and the management says, well, you think you're more productive there, but we think you're more productive here. And I'm, trying to mediate some of these conversations and say to the executives, I think what they're saying is their lives are more productive when they have more freedom, autonomy, and independence, and don't have to be somewhere. Not that their work is more. It's a bigger comment that we may be missing in this conversation. But I agree with you that this has been a big focus for me, particularly now in this seduction world of robots and AI and, technology, and is being the first knee-jerk reaction that people want to talk about when things get hard. Well, the solution must be a new system, a new tool, a new robot, and neglecting the reality that, well, that's going to be utilized, applied, and driven by a human being. So how about let's start with what's not working for us as a business, and then get into maybe technology as an answer, but it's going to be through the hands of an individual, right?
I always love joking when we talk about AI, because it comes up a lot in these conversations. And I remember interviewing a CTO, and he said, "I haven't found a robot with an outgoing personality yet, Deb. We're always going to need people."
Yeah. True.
Now I want to talk about your book. I've watched some of your talks online, and two things that really resonate with me is you say people don't want to be hired anymore. They want to be inspired, and people aren't looking for an adventure. They want a career, but they want it to be an adventure. So number one, I love the name of your book. It's called Work Quake. Very, very creative and appropriate. What laid in your heart to create this book and really encompass to have what I want to call the visionary transformational leadership to bring your head into the future, which I know is in your wheelhouse as a leader, but what really kind of where was the boundary that you drew the line in the sand and thought, okay, Steve, you got to write this book?
I feel it was probably a groundswell of a rising tide of dissatisfaction that I was feeling and seeing in my conversations with employees and in my conversation with employers. I said, something is increasingly unsatisfying for both parties here. And if this is going to be a relationship that's going to reveal greater satisfaction, greater inspiration, dare I say joy, if we're investing all this time of our lives in this venture to try to, the irony is the whole point of working is so you don't have to work, which is I find really interesting. Like we never talk about that. Like the goal of working is so you don't have to work. The goal of working isn't so you can work. Now, some people are just need that challenge, and I'm not one of those people. Like I definitely work to live. And enjoy my freedom and my non-working time. I wasn't always like that, but I would say it was that over time, Deb, that feeling like something's just not right here. And probably it was in 2009, I had just joined electronic arts in a really big, interesting role that I was excited about, where I was going to do lots of mergers and acquisitions. They'd relocated me back to the States from Canada. And then 2008, so it was 2008, so second mortgage crisis hits, and the company's capacity to buy companies basically disappeared. Like the conservatism needed to be realized, like, hey, we got to hold on to the cash. We don't know what this second mortgage crisis is going to deliver. We cannot buy companies. So the job I'd been hired to do essentially evaporated. And I still had a job, and I wasn't insecure in that regard. But I was really, really bored. And so I started to look for another opportunity. And that's when the LinkedIn opportunity came across my radar. And so interviewed, accepted the job. That's a whole nother story. Just so excited about that. And I couldn't sleep for 2 weeks after I interviewed with them, because it was such a perfect match for me. And I think for them too. So I gave my notice. And as soon as I gave my notice, and I'd barely been in electronic arts for a year, I was made to feel awful, like a disloyal sort of, behavior that the company was not very happy with. And they'd paid a lot of money to relocate me. I had to repay all the money that they'd paid to relocate me because I'd, quote, broken my contract. But I was like, wait, the market changed and I've got the opportunity of a lifetime, and you're saying goodbye, giving me enormous amounts of guilt. And the boss that had hired me was taking a lot of heat that she'd lost one of her top hires. And I thought, that's just something's just wrong. And then I started really thinking about it and saying, the whole notion of our relationship was built on a dishonest assumption. You commit to stay here a long time, and we'll commit to employ you here a long time. We both know we probably won't adhere. One of us was probably going to break that promise. But let's start with a false shared assumption that you're going to commit to stay here a long time and we're going to employ you a long time. And it's broken. And so I that was the one that said, okay, this is it. I've got to really start helping people feel that more honest conversations are going to be beneficial. Stop knocking this. You have to be at a company a long time for you to have a vital career or a vital company. Maybe that's not necessary. And that triggered me to sort of go down this path of, I want to articulate a more satisfying future of work. So that was probably the biggest blow to sort of send me on this mission. I wasn't intending on writing a book. I didn't have any illusions at the time. And then probably 10 years later, when I'd stopped my LinkedIn adventure after, 3.5 years, it felt like 20. I was listening. And I'm like, wow, all the stuff that I've been feeling before is even worse now. And I'm seeing more people stay shorter periods of time, but I'm seeing more companies do really well when they have people stay a short period of time. Let me try to present a narrative out there that's more satisfying for people. So that was sort of the triggering event. It wasn't one big thing. Probably the EA experience was the one that started me, but it was over many conversations, probably the last 5 years, that really said, yeah, you got to do this.
And just the, internal struggle that you probably had cognitively and emotionally with your HR background to be experiencing what you may have knew through colleagues or other companies. And then you were in the hot seat. You were the recipient going, this doesn't feel very good.
Right. Absolutely.
It's very humble to sit in the observer's chair sometimes. And it's nice to hear it from someone at your level with that background. And it's so easy for behavior to be pointed to someone else. Like you talked about, the woman who hired you and you were one of the top people on her team. We can't control other people's behaviors. And like you said, you opened the bandwidth, the market had changed, you had the opportunity of a lifetime. Why would you not? And just to have you have that, like you said, that admission of guilt and remorse and almost shame when you were thinking, it's okay to put myself to the first of the line.
Yeah. It's interesting, when I gave my notice to my boss, who I adore to this day, she started crying. And what I heard through her tears were she had lost 7 or 8 of her direct reports over the course of the year. And I was the last one. And I tried to help her reframe it. I said, listen, Gabrielle, you lost someone to be the head of HR for Zynga, which is an incredible game company, someone to be the head of HR for CBS Interactive, someone to be head of HR for Living Social, someone to be head of HR for Dolby Labs. You should see that as a victory, as that this company, that your leadership has put people in a position to have life-changing moments for them and their families. Like that's celebratory, and you're crying right now. And I know in her heart, I think she knew what I was talking about, but she was going to have to face her peers, and they're all about retaining people and retention bonuses. And she was not living it on her team. And she's, responsible for trying to have all these other leaders keep their people longer. And there's no right or wrong here, right? There's sort of it's a continuum. But I had to sort of console her, which was an unexpected place for me to be in.
But you're a heart-centered leader, so you can do that. And what a beautiful reframe from her leadership, all those direct reports going to phenomenal companies.
Right.
And what a nice way to reciprocate and give her a different way of looking and thinking about it. You probably made her cry harder. Okay, my last question I'm super excited about, because when you talk about style, you allude to say, be your own style, lead your own way, learn from others, but learn that they got where they are from being authentic and finding their own arc and voice. People do crave this. And I think this aligns with your stop hiring, start inspiring. So what is Steve's style, and is it still evolving?
Oh, it's definitely still evolving. I mean, if I were to say what my style is, I'm probably not the best person to answer that. Probably anyone who's worked with me or for me is a better source. But what I've been told is real, honest, transparent, first person to say I was wrong. In fact, I'll probably say I'm wrong even if I don't think I'm wrong quickly, to sort of say, let's just disarm the blame game and let's focus on making this right. And that I hope leads other people to feel safe to say, okay, it's broken. Who broke it doesn't matter. If we find that the same person's breaking it like 5 times, okay, then we've got an issue of who. But let's try to focus on solving and the issues rather than who, and finding blame. And in America, we are so good at wanting to find someone to blame something for. Like, we're really good at that. And so I try to disarm that. I also will go out of my way to bring humor and to depressurize situations. So for example, one of my fun achievements in the small universe of my life, when LinkedIn rolled out a skills product where you can say, endorse people for their skills. Like, I know Deb, and she's a great coach. She's a great facilitator. She's a great leader. I thought the product was a little bit silly. So I said, I have a skill of humor, and I would like other people to endorse me for humor. To this day, I have more endorsements for humor than anyone on the LinkedIn platform. And you could create any skill that you wanted to. There wasn't like a drop down list of what the particular skills were, but that has served me incredibly well over the course of my career, that in pressure pack moments, I can sort of bring it down. And that comes from my father, who's a minister, who used the unexpected occasional curse coming from a minister's mouth to completely like disarm people, like, whoa, I'm not in a normal situation. And so I will say things, a lot of times in my profession, when an employee brings an issue forward, they're expecting the human resource executive to completely get behind the company and defend. And many times I go, yeah, you're right. That is wrong. And they're like, what? I go, yeah, it's broken. And so I guess my style is I have broken more policy in my career than I've made, because not every policy is made for every situation. And life is in the transitions, it's in the differences. And I try to be, and I think it comes from growing up in South Africa at a very early age and recognizing difference of perspective and skin color and backgrounds. And that's sort of embedded in me and having a high empathetic index. So, but that's what I try to do. I try to disarm people pretty quickly that you're not in the normal situation. So let's have a real conversation. Right.
Yeah, I love that. And my Irish Nana used to say, you can disarm anything with a little humor and a little candor.
Yep.
I'm going on LinkedIn now, and I'm gonna endorse your humor just because you said that. I want to keep you in the lead there.
Thank you.
How fun is that? And what a snapshot it gives of to people of who you are and what you are when they don't know you.
Yeah.
Your number one trait's humor. I bet you he's a fun guy.
Yeah.
And fun can prevail in leadership. Leaders can be fun, right? There's so much seriousness around the proverbial white, ladder that everybody's climbing. And like you said, you didn't always take time for life, but now you're valuing it. Many executives say that. And then there's many that don't get there.
Yeah.
So it's nice to hear it from someone that you're now valuing, I can slow down a little bit, and I like going golfing and going on vacations with my family. And you get to a certain point where it's okay to have that boundary in place.
Right. And I think early in my career, I had no clue who I was, what was important to me. I was trying to become the mold of what I thought others thought I should be. And at some point I'm like, this is silly. I just got to be me. Like, for example, I was working mostly with women and human resource teams early in my career, and I'd been coached, don't talk about sports. It's a guy thing, okay? That's not going to be interesting to the folks you're working with. It's going to sound like you're all machismo and all that. Don't do that. And so I kept that in, and I was like, okay, I won't talk about sports. And finally, I just couldn't after a while, and I started talking about it. Then I found, people's like, wow, we didn't know you like that. And other people resonate with what you like, and now you've got another dimension that you can bring to. I was like, wow, why had I been told to cloak that and be a robot, be unfeeling and not talk about stuff that's important to me? And so it might not resonate for some people. Okay. Some stuff they're talking about doesn't resonate for me. So it's okay. It's
okay. And I think when we're ourselves and we're real, I think it anchors back to the point that you said, have your own style, adapt to your style, lead in your own way. One of the things I love about this show is we're all imperfect. And when we can have a laugh at ourselves, I think that's the best expression of our imperfection. Like, I can't believe I did that, or what was I thinking? We've all had those moments. But being real and true, people see that. Because whatever comes out of our mouth as verbal expression is really what's going on in our heart. And when our heart's aligned with our head, we're in the right space. And I love that you also said that you've broken more policies than you've created. That's a trailblazer. And sometimes that can be a lonely road. But we need people like that in the world. They don't want to follow the status quo, or they question, well, what do you mean? Or how come it's like this? Or, I remember my Irish Nana telling us stories that, the cliche that we hear on repeat as kids, well, we've always just done it that way. If it's not broke, don't fix it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If we all had that mentality, we wouldn't have anything new.
Right.
So it's very, very interesting. Okay, I'm going to switch to my Fab Four. These are just 4 fun questions. Tell us what's sitting on the top of that brilliant mind of yours. If I asked your family or your close friends to describe you in one word, what word would they give me?
I'd probably say sport.
Sport. Mm-hmm. In the context that you're a good sport?
In the context of everything I love about sports is what I love about leadership.
Okay, sports.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Hence playbook. I'll be excited to send you mine. Okay, second question, and you cannot use your own book.
Okay.
A little context around it. So share with us a book that you've read at any juncture in your life that was really impactful. What was the name of the book? Who is the author? And why did it impact you?
There's a few. The one I'll use is Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point. I think whatever you do in life, whatever you do, you're trying to change something. You're trying to move something from here to there, to grow this, to shrink that, to change this. And what I love about that book is it massively reframed me from instead of looking at one thing, that change happens from hundreds of things, and that this is a ecosystem play, not a one lever to pull play. And that has served me incredibly well in my career, and also gave me tools of when you're changing something in an organization, for example, there are people who can really help you, and they're the people who mostly disagree with you that other people listen to. And Gladwell calls them mavens. Like, find the people who are most vocally in disagreement with what you want to change, who have the most ears and the respect in the organization, and don't change the whole organization. Change them first. Get them on your side, and listen why they disagree or why they want. And if you can win them, then you will have a massive advantage. And so that served me so well. So and it's probably, 10 years dated or so, but it was a real game changer for me.
That is a good book. And it's been brought up on the show before. And it's, it's bringing us back to those elementary school days where we were learning about one to many. Mm-hmm. And there's, like you said, it's not a lever. It's just not a one system approach or answer to get to the resolution or solution that you're trying to get to. Great book. I agree. Okay. Third question. Here's some context. I'm granting you a wish, and you get to have dinner with a leader of your choice. This leader may be living. Maybe this leader has passed away. Who are you having dinner with, and what is the dinner conversation?
It's top of mind for me. I don't know if it's going to be the bullseye leader that some business folks would be thinking about, but for me, this person shaped an industry, and a generation. It's Bill Russell. Bill Russell was, one of the first Black superstar basketball players. He graduated from University of San Francisco, where I got my master's. Go Dons. He, endured enormous amounts of racism. He was with Dr. Martin Luther King, and in a moment of, character defining moment when Dr. King gave the I Have the Dream speech, he invited Bill Russell with him because Bill had enormous followership given his athletic prowess and his experience. And Bill said, and he just recently met Dr. King, and Dr. King said, "You stand behind me." And he says, "No, I want to stand in front because I haven't earned the right to stand behind you yet. I haven't really delivered the change that you're speaking to." So it would be all around, what was it like growing up in that era, and what was America and the world like at that time, and how hard and how courageous it must have been to face what he faced.
Yeah, and it's so humbling just to hear, I remember my grandma reading a poem to me about, you don't walk in front of me, you don't walk behind me, you walk beside. And just to hear that analogy from that history, from that era, from that time, and the level of respect that they had, and just the camaraderie that they had, that would definitely be an interesting dinner for sure. So before I close out the show with my last question, I'm just going to say, You are more delightful than I anticipated you to be. I knew you were going to be great, but this has been such a fun conversation. I just would like to come through the computer here and continue on. I wish you much success. We're going to put your bio and links to your book below in the podcast episode description. And I just want to say, like, you're someone that I look up to. And if I learned anything about calling you and getting you on the show is I always think, again, Irish Nana wisdom, I think it's good for us to have nervousness and excitement and butterflies to meet other people. But at the end of the day, we're just people. And all you have to do is reach out and send a nice email and say, hey, this is who I am. And this is what I would love to talk to you about. And there's always a surprise on the other side when you receive a yes. So thank you for saying yes to being on the show. I'm excited to read your book. And I'm definitely going to go give you a LinkedIn review for your humor, your candor, your realness. And you are a heart-centered leader, Steve.
Thank you so much.
You really are. So I'm going to ask you to finish the show by finishing this sentence for me.
Okay.
Heart-centered leadership is
living the world from a 100% empathetic point of view, whereas always seeing the world through the lens of those around you and appreciating the difference in that.
Thanks for joining me today on Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. I hope that you've enjoyed the show today and learned some new tools for your leadership from our amazing heart-centered guest. And if you like the show, we would welcome a rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. And we would love to have any comments or feedback at any time. And if you want some more heart-centered goodness, head over to our daily blog, masteringtheheart.com.